Now, if you have ever wondered how you can send multiple emails to different people in such a way that you don't have to send each email at a go, having to attach the same attachments, same files, same email copy, then this is the video for you. My name is William from Data Psychoanalytics, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon to be notified once we produce this kind of videos. Alright, so let's go on and see what is in store in this video. Well, you're on Excel, you need to go to the developer menu and click on Visual Basic. Now, if you don't have the developer menu, you can add it by right clicking on top of the ribbon, then click customize the ribbon, and on this dialog box you just make sure this developer has a tick. By default it normally is not ticked, so you simply tick and press OK. So when you go to the developer menu, you click on Visual Basic, then it will open for you the what we call the Visual Basic editor. Now within the Visual Basic editor, you'll come and right click and choose to insert a module. Now once you insert a module, you'll get a clean canvas like this, and then you type your code. Now for this case, the basic automation tool would require you to define probably two variables. In our case, the first variable will be a reference to the Outlook application, and the out email variable there will allow us to reference an instance of a new email. Once you start composing, whatever screen you get, that is what this variable has been set to. So you define them as such. If it's an application, then you'll say set that variable to be create object, and then you say outlook.application. Then once you do that, you follow that up with this so that it can create a new instance for you to compose the email. Now, in this with clause, from this point to this point, we are running a set of codes, and this set of codes will be applied to this new instance of an email so that you're able to define the different parameters that we've seen. So you have to define whom you're sending the email to, and as you're defining that, you need to put that in quotation marks, but separated by a semicolon in between the different recipient emails. Then you do the same with the copy email. If you're not sending anyone on copy, then you can remove that part so that you just open and close quotes. All right. Then also define the subject line. Again, because it's a text string, you just enclose that in quotes. Then .attachments.add means you're going to be adding this file, okay? And as you specify the file name, you put the full path name, including the name of the file with its extension, whether it's a .pdf or Excel or any other file, or a zip folder .zip. Then you include that in those quotation marks and those parentheses. Then again, you define the body of the email by just typing within the double quotes. As you send, you may want to display the email first and then send. So the .display would ideally display the screen with all the fields having been filled by this what you have defined here. Then once you're ready to send, you just press .send. To avoid errors, you cannot use these two together. Okay, you can't display then .send or .send then display. It's one or the other so that you avoid having errors. Ultimately, then you have to reset this application and the email so that you're able to continue using the Outlook. So this is the basic automation email. Now the challenge with this way of automating the sending of the emails is that, for instance, when you define the people whom you're sending the email to, and you separate these in semicolons, this presents to us two challenges. One is that if you have a long list, you can guess how long the line would look like, and it will not be manageable. Secondly, these people whom you are sending the emails to will all see that the rest of the recipients are included, and that's not what you want. You want to send to say William, but William just sees the email, an individualized email. But in this case, if you put it like this, then they will see that the people who have been sent to the emails will all be visible. The same case with the copy to. So there is less flexibility when you do it like this. So in the next loop of this video, we are going to see how you can use the Excel worksheet to hold these variables. So you give these as variables within your worksheet, and then use those variables in the code. Okay, so let's look at that in this. Let me open that code. You'll find this in this file. Once you download it, the code is there. So with this code, we are going to first of all have to define in our Excel worksheet what exactly will go into this code. So let's look at how we've set up the Excel worksheet. Okay, so this file, once you get it, it has a number of worksheets. I've included some instructions for you here, so make sure you go through the instructions. Then you have this worksheet called same attachments for all. So in this worksheet, you define the key variables for your email. Of course, you need a subject line. You need how you want your people to be addressed. Is it a dear? Is it greetings, or is it hi? Now I put it there just in case you're doing this. I mean, you're addressing everyone as with the same salutation. If you're doing it with a different approach, some is greetings, others hi or something, then you might want to tweak this, but this works for most of the people being addressed dear, no worries. We have 3 tables in this worksheet. This first one defines the emails you're sending or the recipients. Okay, then this second table, these are the people you're putting on the copy to, the carbon copy field. And this third table allows you to specify the file paths in your computer where you've stored the files that you want to send to your recipients. So something like this. So you have this folder in my desktop called mail files, and it has these different files which I can specify to be included in my attachment. Mark you, they don't have to be in the same folder. The path name is what is important. So this is how we set up our worksheet, and something you need to be keen on, because we shall reference that in our code, is that these 3 tables have been formatted as special tables in Excel. Generally, you store your data in rows and columns, and that we normally talk of a normal range or a normal list. But when you format it as a special table, then it comes with a new menu, the far right of your menus up there on the ribbon. You will see table design or design depending on what version you're using. So long as you're within a table and you see that particular menu, then you understand that's a special table and it behaves slightly different in Excel. So since that is outside the scope of this video, I'll include a link in the description of this video so that you can check out what an Excel table is. So this table, the first one has been labeled S underscore on the far left here, S underscore table 2 emails. Then you have this second one. It's been also given a name, S underscore table CC emails. Then the third one here has been given this name, S underscore table attachments. So those are named ranges. Again, I can put a link on the description for you to go through what is a named range, or you can sign up for some of our online courses for you to get familiar with these concepts. Now, this line or this cell B3 is the subject line, and it is also labeled on the name box there as subject line text. Then this one, the salutation, is s_salutation text, and that can take any name that you prefer, but for this code we shall use those names. Now one more thing is that we have this worksheet called email body message, and it has explanation of how you'd type the actual email message. Okay, so you type your text that you want to see in the email body. So for instance, if you're saying hi, please find attached and so forth. But the key thing here is that one, as you type, because you're typing in one single cell in Excel, for you to go to the next line, please press Alt Enter on the keyboard so that you can allow the space in between the lines. Secondly, is that this cell has also been labeled or given a name s_email message. So those named ranges, we shall see how they are being used in our code to reference these particular cells. So let's look at that code. So let's go through this code here. So we start by defining the two variables like we saw previously. Then we also define several other variables that will be useful for our code as we continue writing. Before we run any code, we don't want any interference or prompts that normally arise because either a formula is updating or there is a prompt for you to save a certain file or something. So we are putting that off here so that we can run smoothly. Then after that, we now define what is the main body of our email, and that we are referencing a worksheet called email message worksheet. Now on the left side here, you notice we have normally a worksheet would be named either sheet 1 in brackets, then the name that you've given to that worksheet. Now sheet 1 here, or if you have another worksheet, it will be sheet 2, sheet 3. That sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3 is normally what we call the code of that particular worksheet, which you can always change and reference in your code. Now I prefer giving the worksheet a code name that I can use within my code, so that if somebody uses a different name of the worksheet, instead of typing email body message, they just type email_body, then it doesn't affect my code because I'm using this particular code name which they don't have access to. So with this email message worksheet dot range, then in double quotes you put the named range for that particular cell which we said has the email body. So this is the actual cell that we are referencing. Next, we activate this worksheet. S_setup worksheet is actually the worksheet that has the different variables or the parameters that are needed in our email. So simply activating so that it's the active worksheet. Then with that active worksheet here, we just say that we have a variable for holding our email subject, and that is given as this particular range in that worksheet. Like I mentioned before, we have given the different cells the name. So the subject line cell is the one we are referencing there. Then here is the salutation cell. Then within the same worksheet again, we define those table names so that we are able to reference them in these codes. The special tables I'm talking about here, these are the special tables. So we give these tables names that will be used in our code. All right, so this line here sets this variable. If you scroll up, you'll see we have different tables here defined. We have 3 of them here. The one that has the send to emails, and the one that has the copy to emails, and the third one is the one that has the files for attachment. So we will define those 3 tables before we run the code. So once we define that table as a .list object, this is how you reference a special table in Excel VBA. So the name of the table, which you saw earlier, is the one we put there. Then here we will need to loop through the table that has the emails to be put on copy. So we first of all set or define that particular table as that particular named range, which we saw earlier. Then we introduce a for loop, so it will loop through a set of rows, okay, so that you define a variable called CC row. They are all defined up here, so you have these different rows here which you shall be using. All these will be used in the code. So the CC row here will allow us to loop through the copy to emails table. So you are simply saying that if you go to that particular table and look at the data body range, the first row, then take the row number. Okay, the data body range simply references this particular area, okay, excluding the headers. So when I say data body range within this table, I'm referencing that particular range, A7 to B10. In this case, because we are looking at this one, then the data body range is F7 to F9. And those are the rows we are trying to skim through and pick the emails to be put on copy. I included a blank one so that we see that the code is flexible even if you don't have anything within this table. All right. So the first row here is what we are simply saying in our code is the data body range, the first row at the top, then take the row number. So it will take the worksheet row number. In this case, it's row number 7. So when I say data body range 1, in brackets 1, then dot row, I'm saying get row number 7. Okay. Then starting from that row number 7 up to what point? What is the last row that we need to consider in that table? So we run up to, first of all, I'm using this to get what is the row number for the row that has the headings within that table. So that will be a 6. Okay, because we've seen the first row with data or the emails is number 7. The previous one should be the header row. So that's number 6. Then this one that says dot list rows dot count, it's counting the number of rows within or that have the email addresses. So when I come here, these are the rows that it's counting from F7 to F9. So those are how many? 3 of them. Okay. So when you say add 3 to the row number that has the header, that's 6 plus 3. So you're simply saying starting from the first row of the table, that's row number 7, up to this part will give us 9. The last row is number 9. Then loop through that and always put something in that variable called CC emails, and we will append the value in that particular, the current row, the first column. You see, when I say dot column, I mean the first, and I put 1 here. If I put 2, then I'm saying there's a second column. In this case, we are saying the first column has the emails, and then when I say dot column, it gives me the actual column number. In this case, I expect that to give me column number for column F. So if I say equals column like that, then it will give me a 6. That part will give me a 6. Control Z to undo. So this line is simply saying in the current row you're in, column number 6. So if, for instance, you're in row number 7, column 6, then that intersection, that cell, get the value in that cell and combine it using a semicolon. We saw that when you're putting the emails on copy, you can separate them with a semicolon. So that is essentially what is happening here. And this variable comes before this ampersand to combine First of all, it will take nothing, because initially there is nothing, then combine with the first thing it gets, okay, using a semicolon. So this part will allow us to loop through and assign this variable for copying the email. So that variable at the end of the loop will have all the emails within that table. Now the next thing we define here is the table that will host the path names for the attachments. So when I say this dot list objects, as I'm simply saying this worksheet dot list objects is the syntax, then this named range is the table here. This table here, if I highlight, you notice here it's s_ table attachment list. Okay, so we are referencing that table. It's a named range. So that simply defines that particular table for attachments, and we shall need it at some point when we are doing the attaching of files. Then when we press the send emails button, we need to know where do we start and where do we end. So to allow us to get those starting and the last rows, then we define these three variables. The first one is send to first column. Okay, so what is the column with email addresses? Okay, so when you look at this table, so this is the first column. Even if I had if I insert a column there and just have it like that, if you look at this code, this, because it's referencing a table which we defined up there, and it's taking that special table, the range of that special table, the first column. Okay, so even if you added these extra blank columns here, okay, that particular piece of code will not be interfered with, because it will always look within this table, the data body range within this table, the first column. That's what that piece of code is saying. So let me delete these two. So when you look at this here, that's what that line of code is saying. Then within that particular column, we define what is the start row. Again, it's within the same table, the first row that has the email. So when I say one within the data body range, the data body range, I said, excludes the headers. Okay, so the first row. Then the last row will therefore be defined by the starting row. Then you add certain number of rows, which simply means we take the number of rows within the data body area. Okay, so that means this part, how many rows are defined there. In this case, there are 4. Okay, then -1. Okay, because if the send to start row is the first row that has the email address, and then you're adding this number of rows that you're counting within the same data range, then you've already double counted the first row. That's why we are saying -1. The next line of code here sets the application to Outlook so that Excel can understand what application you are using to send the emails. This one just helps you to manage any errors that may arise, and in case the rest of the code here runs into an error, then you're telling Excel to skip it and go to a location in this code which we've called cleanup. So if I come down here, you'll see there's this part of the code, and therefore it will run this whatever follows after that section called cleanup. So if I come back up here, it's time now to loop through as we send the emails. So we need to define our starting row. Okay, so I have a variable called iRow, which is defined again at the top there. And this iRow will loop through the first row which we've defined here shortly. So we defined it here. So that's our starting row up to the last row. Okay, now you understand. Okay, then as it loops within that those number of rows. So what happens? First thing we need to do is to define the range or the email to send to, okay? Who is receiving this email, okay? And that's what we are defining here with this variable called toEmail, and it's defined within this worksheet, a cell called iRow and the first column. So this simply means, because the start row at this point would be this number 7, okay? So that's the iRow. The first iRow number will be 7, okay? So the cell row 7, column 1, because this one will be dependent on the first column within the table, okay? So that intersection, whatever is in that cell, is the email address that you want. And because you might have spaces, extra ones, then we are putting the trim function to trim any extra space, unnecessary space. Now, before we use that email to send, then we validate it by checking what is the format of that email. So for instance, if the email would be william@dca.com, then here, this @ is what you've heard me mention, William @ okay? So before the @ and after the @ then you're expecting a certain number of characters, okay? So the asterisk means you can have as many number of characters, but the question mark means there's a placeholder for one character. So you can have William, so star, and then the question mark before the @ means maybe the name William, or William.Carey, or Joy, you get. So whatever number of characters, but at least you expect one character there. @ then what follows after @ is that you can have one character after @ followed with many characters, and then a period. So you can see there is a period there, a full stop, and again followed with certain number of characters. So that just helps you to see if the syntax of the email matches the standard email syntax, because it will always have an @ somewhere. Then you're simply saying if that takes that kind of a syntax, and that is met, and the email subject is not blank, meaning you have to define what it is. If you leave it blank, then you might get an error. Then if that is true, then continue with this code. What do you do first? You open a new email to send or to compose. Then this just allows you to resume to the next course of action if any of this code below evaluates to an error. Once you open that new email and you've assigned it to that variable, then you can do many things with that variable like we looked at previously. Then here we're defining how your email body looks like, or is it a plain text or is it a HTML? In this case we're using HTML. You could use plain text or something else. And then we're first doing a .display so that it displays first the composer, if we may call it like that. But then the most important thing about that line, because it normally comes at the end, but we're putting it at the top of this line of code, is so that it is able to retrieve the signature. Okay, that's very critical. We're using this to allow us to retrieve the signature which is stored within your. If I remove this, then your email will go without a signature. So you can try that once you get this code. It will not break as much. Then we've already defined this variable up there, the two emails. It's already here. So you just say for the .to, take whatever is within that variable. The same case with the subject and the copy two emails. Again, when it comes to the attachments here, then we look through the table which you can see here. So we look through this table and look at the path names here. Again, using the same concept that we've used for these previous two tables to look through, then we define a certain row. It's defined at the top of our code. This row is defined as the first row in our data body range where the attachments are listed, up to, again, the header row plus the number of rows within that particular table. Okay, so if the header row is row number 6, then plus this number of rows. So 6 plus 4 will be 10 in this case, which means run from the first row, okay, up to row number 10. And the first row here is row number 6. Let's confirm. So this, it's row number 7. So from this particular row, that's the starting point, up to row number, so this part will give us a 10. So you put a dot attachments dot add, and then what do we add? It's defined by the positioning of the row you're in as you look through, and the first column of that table. Okay, so the intersection, take that particular path name and put it as an attachment, then look to the next row, put it in the attachment, and so forth until the last row that has the attachment. The next parameter that we need to define is what would be the composition of your email body. So we have a variable which we are calling the toMessage, because it will have a combination of the salutation and whether you, the name of the person you're sending to, and then the actual email address. So we're putting some syntax here, which again, like I mentioned, you don't have to cram. But if you ever need to change this, you simply need to come here and change this, the font size I'm using. The font type that I'm using is Sego UI. You can change it to Calibri or Times New Roman or any other you prefer. Then the font size, I'm preferring 10.5. You can change it as well. And you can change the color code. This is the hexa color code. Okay, so that will be the way the email body will be formatted. Then the salutation here is simply what you have here, dear. Then the next thing that will follow is dear Billy, for instance. So when you come here, you see dear, and then this portion of the formula will pick the name Billy. So we're simply saying the current row you're in, then the first column plus 1. So I'm adding a plus 1 because the first column has the emails. So for me to get to the next one, I have to say plus 1. All right. So the current row, then that particular column, okay, that value in that cell. So it will be dear William or dear Joyce, dear whichever other name. Then combine that with a line break, okay? So we are doing a line break. It's like entering, so that it goes to the next row or line. Combine that with the main body, which we defined, if you remember, up here. We defined the main body as this particular range, okay? This is the main body, just for your reference, okay? So that combination will give you the composition of your email. And of course, this being HTML, you have to close that tag. Then you're saying, initially we put .body, but because we are using a HTML, then we put .html body. And then we are doing a replacement here for this message here, okay? Remember, this main body, okay? This one which we saw here, we used Alt-Enter to go to the next line and allow the spacing in betweens. But when it comes to HTML, it doesn't understand those breaks, okay? So those breaks are what we are calling VBLF. It's just a matter of code. Again, you don't have to cram. So you're saying replace those breaks with the HTML kind of breaks, which are BR, okay? And of course, wrap that as .html, and finally you put .send. Once the emails have been sent, the next I row is where the loop for the emails which you're sending ends. When it sends the last email, then it will give you this success message, okay? So you'll get this success message there. This will be the heading of that dialog box which will come up. But when you see this dialog box, it doesn't mean they have been delivered. If you are sending many, then you will see them being delivered one at a go, in the sense that they will be in your outbox, but they will be delivered one after the other. So down here we continue with the code as we had explained earlier on. So this is the code that you'd need to send the emails. And this is the setup of the worksheet for the variables that we've seen in the code. So I hope this is clearer now, that once you set up these as has been defined here, by simply doing it like this and typing your email body here, then you simply come and click to send emails, and you'll see the emails getting composed and being sent to their recipient. So if I click here, for instance, then you see the emails were composed one after the other, with the attachments being added as such, okay? And you see the message, you've successfully sent the emails. But if sending bulk, you may be in some may be in the outbox, simply what I explained earlier on. So you don't have to touch the code, it's all set up for you, and you simply press OK. So that explains how you would send the same email with the same attachments to different recipients. They could be 100, could be 200, and this will work as expected. In the files that you downloaded, there was this second file that allows you to define the actual attachment per recipient. So if the files which you are attaching are different for each recipient, then you define this table. We had these two previously, and instead of having a different table for the attachments, then for the same row you define the attachments for that particular person. So again, you're putting the full path name to be included for the attachments. I've skipped this particular cell. It has nothing, but the rest have something, so that you can see that even if you left it blank, if there were no attachments and you deleted all these, then it still works as expected, all right? But the rest of the code is slightly different, but I've already explained the different parameters. When you open the code, you'll see how it has been laid out, but in terms of the logic and the layout, it's the same as what I've explained, as if you're sending the same attachment list to different recipients. So that's it for this, and I hope going forward you'll leverage this particular file, and it will save you quite a chunk of time as you're sending the emails to the different people that you'd want to communicate to. Now, if you found this tutorial useful, I'll appreciate your love by sharing it out. If you have any concerns or any observations on the code or the way the file is working, or it doesn't work for your scenario, please leave a comment below and we shall be able to chat and see how you can improve on this. Always go to the blog, which I have referenced in the description of this video, for the most current file that you can use for these kind of scenarios. Based on the user feedback, we shall keep updating this file. And before you leave, kindly subscribe to our channel click on the bell icon below so that you are notified of these useful videos as we keep producing them. And ultimately, our goal is to make you proficient in Excel, but more importantly, that you would save your valuable time for more core business core functions. Thank you for watching.